Hello, everyone. Oops. Welcome to Configuration Manager 2012, the OSD technical overview. My name is John Vinsel. I'm a senior program manager on the product team. I have with me.
My name's Brett Flegg. I'm a principal developer on the development team of Configuration Manager.
So in today's sessions, we're going to kind of go over some new features that we've introduced for operating system deployment with Configuration Manager 2012. It's all generally available now, so you'll be able to take advantage of these features immediately. We're also going to talk about some improvements to existing features that you guys have, so you can kind of see like maybe some requests you had for Configuration Manager 2007 you might not have seen yet. We'll talk a little bit about those. Quick breakout, we're going to talk about a new feature called offline servicing. We're going to talk about a lot of changes to media, some things to help you out, and a big DCR that we took. USMT changes. If any of you guys attended the app model sessions yesterday, some talk about how we integrate with the app model, as well as Pixie updates, import-export, deployment alignments, and some changes with centralized management. And then just a quick note before we get started, I just wanted to kind of call out anyone that might not have been in the State of the Union. We actually put out a really cool fun fact about ConfigMan OSD. Since January, the product team uses this to provision their entire test infrastructure. So as we continually test and validate the product, we've provisioned 45,000 VMs with Configuration Manager GA product. So we're hammering on this on a daily basis and getting a lot of traction on it. And it's our core mechanism for doing OS deployment on the product team. So with that, let's just get started.
So I wanted to start by talking about offline servicing. We received a lot of feedback from you that updating your images and recapturing them on a monthly or quarterly basis was a bit of a pain. And applying updates as part of the task sequence could lead to undeterministic times for the task sequence itself, and sometimes you'd get some errors in there. And either way, you'd have a window where you'd have an unpatched machine on your network. So what we've done is work with the Windows team to add the ability to apply software updates to an image offline before you even deploy it. And we've integrated that in with our console so that you can use it using the processes and tools that you're used to using. I will call out from an operating systems perspective, this supports Windows Vista SP2 and above and Windows Server 2008 SP2 and above. Basically, that means everything in your environment except Windows XP. And this does work for CBS-based updates. So in general, that means that that's going to work for your updates to your operating system, but updates for applications such as Office still need to be applied in the traditional mechanism. So as I mentioned, we've hooked this up entirely into the existing process. So for example, one of the things we do is automatically filter any of the updates that you can apply to your operating system by what's already been synced and approved inside of your environment. So you know that any of the updates that you're applying have already been in use. We've hooked this all up through a schedule updates wizard in the UI. And I'll move to the next slide and talk a bit about that.
Cool. So what you're saying here is, once you've deployed all these updates to your environment, all I have to do is go into my console, and I can click a wizard and then apply those to my OS image. It's just that easy?
Absolutely.
Cool.
So a bit about how this works technically. We do all of the work on the site server itself. Now, the first thing we do is actually make a backup of the operating system image so that if anything goes wrong or if you've deployed that image and you see any kind of issues, you can very quickly and easily revert back to the last known good image. Once we've done that, we then mount the image and scan and apply the software updates for that image and then commit it back to disk. Now, as you can imagine, this is an I/O-intensive process, and so you may not want to do it during the day. So we give you the ability to schedule it something like 2 a.m. in the morning to make sure that it's less impact onto your system. And I think, John, can I just go straight into the demo?
Yep.
Perfect.
So let's just show you how this works.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys. So here we are in the System Center 2012 Configuration Manager console. And I'm going to click on the Operating System Images tab. And you can see here I have a Windows 7 Enterprise image already loaded. I can launch into this new experience by clicking the Schedule Updates action on the wizard bar. You'll notice here that the updates are automatically filtered by the architecture of the image, and I have the ability to select which of the updates. Again, the update list here has automatically been filtered by updates that have already been improved in my environment. Now, normally I could just do all, but for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to apply a couple of these. You'll notice, by the way, that you have the full information available here as well. Now, again, in general, best to do this as something, schedule it as an update for something like 2 a.m. in the morning so that there's no impact on the rest of your environment. For the sake of the demo, I'm going to run this as soon as possible. And I'm simply going to click Finish. At this point, we're then going to go create the job on the site server that's going to go do the operating system image update. My preview part has disappeared here. But if I go here, previously I've actually already done an update on the system. And what you can see here is we give you the update, the status of the last updates. So you can see here the set of updates that I targeted, and you can get detailed information about the ones that were not required or the ones that were successfully installed. I can also go here into the Properties page under Installed Updates and get the full history of the updates that have been applied to this machine. Finally, you see that the last status was update. If I hit refresh here, with any luck, you'll see that the scheduled update's actually already in progress. So I can able to actually, just inside the console, be able to monitor the status in progress. Thank you.
And from a product team side, again, we're using this feature internally to continually update our images, deploy our environment, so it's helped us reduce our overall deployment times by 30 minutes to 60 minutes for a normal image, and it's reduced the amount of time we've actually had to go and do those build and captures on those images. So from us, it's just been hundreds of hours of savings on our test environment, just getting things up and running and testing the product out for you guys. There we go. Okay, next I'm going to kind of talk about some media improvements. We made a few changes to the area of media. First thing we're going to talk about is changes to the pre-start command, which we used to call a pre-execution hook. So we've done some improvements there. We've also done a few improvements to help with automation scenarios. So we know a lot of you guys are doing some script type stuff, or maybe you're leveraging Michael's MDT. You might use some of these hooks to kind of help with some automation there. And the last slide, we're going to talk about probably the most asked for DCR in OSD, which is hierarchy-wide media. So the first thing here is pre-start command. In Configuration Manager 2007, we had this concept called the pre-execution hook. And it was really a catch-all to kind of help you guys do any kind of early setup or scripting in our environment and put special hooks or kind of any kind of workarounds in there. We knew that most of the customers were kind of using it, so we went and we actually built it into the product and made it easier to use instead of mounting a WIM and manually adding all this stuff. So what we've done is we've gone and we've integrated it into the media creation process. We'll allow you to go and actually browse to a package as you create media and then specify the custom command line. So it's really easy to do. It'll work for boot media, Pixie, or standalone media. For capture media, it obviously doesn't work there. And the pre-start command still doesn't work from an existing OS, so if you're starting from Software Center. But all the normal WinP boot methods, it's built in and it's in the UI for you, so it's easy to take advantage of. Okay, the next thing we did was a bunch of automation improvements. The first one we did was the unattended boot media. I cruised the forums a lot, and I saw that you guys noticed that if you went and edited INI on the boot media, you could set it to unattended mode. That was something we had as part of our capture task sequence to make it a little bit more seamless, but people thought, hey, this is kind of cool, and we kind of want to eliminate some of the UI here. The thing is, when you did that, we still had the next screen. So what we've done is we've actually brought it forward and made it a real feature of creating unattended boot media. So if you're doing a lot of scripting, you don't need to show any of our UI. You can either use something like UDI or your own custom UI to do that, and we'll suppress all the native task sequence screens. The one exception there is the password. We want to make sure that all the media is always as secure as possible, so password will override unattended mode. The next one is another real big one that we've seen for things like maybe if you're doing some kind of deployments to servers, or maybe you're doing some things to like some headless workstations, maybe you have some kiosks out there. We call it the ability to select a deployment from a pre-start command. So what this does is you can actually set up a pre-start command, maybe put in some sort of script wrapper or an HTA there. You're going to select like a business unit. You can say, you know what, finance maps to this task sequence. So you can create an HTA that selects the input, and then you can go and set a variable, it's called SMSTS preferred advert ID, to the deployment ID of the task sequence. Once that's set, that will go and override anything that's deployed to that system. So it'll kind of treat it like a required deployment. You can make that available, set this variable, and it'll still treat it as a required deployment. So it's a great way for you to put some sort of business logic in the front end of your task sequence and then turn it into an automated workflow without having to have some of those required deployments out there. Anything else I missed there? Nope. Okay. And then the last one, the top customer ask in 4 years I've been working on this feature, which is hierarchy-wide media, the option not to have that boot media tied to your infrastructure. Now, in fairness, we did make it a lot easier with the hierarchy reduction in Configuration Manager 2012, so you didn't need as much media, but we really wanted to close the loop on it and make it just a seamless experience and allow you to only have one piece of media to manage your Configuration Manager environment. So we've introduced a new mode called Dynamic Media, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the wizard, and then I'm going to explain how it works in a moment here. Essentially, what it'll do is the media will dynamically find the site based on the management point and the boundaries. So what we'll do is we'll go and create media, and we'll actually create a list of MPs. So today, there's one hard-coded MP on the site. We're actually going to let you build a list, and that list is going to be used for the initial communication. We'll allow you to put several MPs in there. That way, if one of the MPs is down, we'll actually be able to follow to the next one on the list and actually make that media resilient. And then lastly, we're still going to keep that site-based media around for a little bit while. We'll probably get rid of it in a release or two, but if you still have a need and you don't want to go to the dynamic mode, we'll keep that around for right now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk you through the experience, and then I'm going to walk you through the workflow of how it works. I found it's just best to show how the UI sets up the media and then talk through it. Okay, so I go over to my task sequences node, and I go create task sequence media, and create bootable media, hit next. You'll see the two options here. I have dynamic media and site-based media. Naturally, we think most people are going to use dynamic, so that'll be our default. The same options we have today for setting up a USB or a CD. So I'll just create demo.iso. Again, we also have the options to set a password. For the sake of a demo, I'm not going to set any password. Okay, and here's where the change really comes in. We have the ability to go and associate these management points. So we'll go and we'll list all the management points, give you the site code so you know where you're kind of picking from, and allow you to select these. Additionally, we have the ability to prioritize these, so you can set them in the order that you want the media to work from. One other quick change I'll just kind of call out because it's kind of nice. It makes it easier with the new hierarchy design. We've also made a nice little picker here for when you're selecting a distribution point. I went to a few customer sites and noticed that that old drop-down we had got a little overwhelming, so just a little UI enhancement for you guys. Then again, here I can go set a pre-start command like I had just talked about, and then create my media. So it's just that simple. It's just one new page in the wizard, and it allows you to go and select that management point that you're going to need for the initial communication. And like I said, select one-to-many so you have some resiliency. Okay, so now that you've actually made this media, how does it kind of work internally here? So essentially, the client's going to get booted starting using the dynamic media. So for this example, it's going to go to the Detroit site. It's going to send an initial MP lookup. And this is just only a couple K of data. It's basically information about the network that the client's booting from. So enough of us to figure out where those boundaries are and know where to send you. So naturally, the management point is going to talk to the database server and say, hey, I got this guy. Where should he go? Oops. Get the request, compare it to all the boundaries that are set up, send the proper MP information back to the client. So it's going to say, hey, you don't belong to my site. You actually belong to that Berlin site over there. Then the client's going to go and connect to the Berlin site and actually do his OS deployment from there. So it'll do an initial lookup request, send a few K of data, and then dynamically figure out what the actual MP it needs to use for the rest of the deployment is, and it'll actually run all the information from that local network topology at that point. Pretty cool? You doing USMT?
No.
No, okay. All right, next one. If you guys are using USMT 4.0 with Configuration Manager 2007, you probably know it takes like 14 different steps to set that up and get it working for hard links. We've gone and we've done some UI optimization, brought a full integration of the feature in. So just made it way easier for you guys to leverage the USMT 4.0 features and get those Windows 7 deployments out quicker. We're going to support the hard link feature. We support the offline feature, so if you want to do any of those captures from WinPE. In fact, our internal MSIT team only does the capture from WinPE. That way the capture is always taking place, whether they're just rebuilding from boot media and not starting from Software Center, or if they are starting from Software Center. So it just makes it easier from their troubleshooting standpoint. And then if you wanted to use the shadow copy feature, we added the support for that in there as well.
We'll talk about applications, though. So hopefully folks had a chance to go take a look at the application labs yesterday and throughout the week to see how the new app model works in the system. Of course, it wouldn't be complete unless it was also in your operating system deployment, and hopefully we don't disappoint. Before we get to the new stuff, though, I will mention that the install software action is still there. It's been renamed the install package action, so you can rest assured you can still use all of your existing packages and programs as well while you're moving to the app model, or for the specific things that packages and programs tend to do well. So a couple of quick notes on the implementation. What we'll actually do is we use all of the core client infrastructure, which is pretty cool in that you actually make sure that you have the exact same set of troubleshooting steps, and you're assured that the behavior is the same way. For those of you who are familiar with the old install software action, there were some slight differences with the client that ended up kind of biting you on occasion. And so the fact that we're actually integrated in with the core client and using all of the same code certainly makes that simpler. The other cool thing you get with that is dependencies. So when you have the app model, apps can have a rich set of dependencies, and we automatically track those back and install the dependencies if they're not already on the system.
So it's really cool. If you guys have spent any time with this app model yet, you'll notice it's a really rich interface that you can go and create complex rules and do complex delivery and take all that stuff you used to do on the back end and simplify it and get rid of the script wrappers. All you have to do is go and click it and add it to the UI. You don't have to do task sequence conditions. You don't have to do your own custom scripting. And we're just going to leverage through the normal client SDK. So we made it real easy to integrate with all the hard work that you're going to put into app and optimize it. And it's just going to be real easy to use. And like we said, the dependencies, one-to-many for all the online deployments. We're just going to take advantage of that. So it should simplify your task sequence all up, and you don't have to create these 100 or 1,000-step task sequence with multiple apps and dependency chains. So hopefully it's made it a lot easier for you guys to deploy OSD.
So I'm not going to demo the install application action today, but I will just show the UI here and call out a couple of the key things. First of all, as before, you can directly specify the set of applications that you'd like to install. Now, one of the things we noticed when we looked at your task sequences was that you'd have these long chains of install software actions, and rather than making you use groups and complicating your task sequence, we actually allow you to multi-select the set of applications that you install in here. So using the UI, you can select up to 9 applications per action, just to help group those a little bit better for you. We've also worked with our friends over in the MDT team, and we support the dynamic variable list that they tend to populate using the set of scripts, so that you can install up to 99 applications using the variable.
Cool. So again, just some UI optimization, trying to simplify your task sequence, make it a little bit easier to do everything for you guys.
There's a lot of content on this slide, no pun intended. So I'm not going to walk through each of the items. You'll get a copy of the slide deck offline, and you can take a look through it. Just a couple of the key highlights. We support all of the main content download options. The one thing I will say is when we looked at dependencies, it didn't make sense, even when you were doing download all content before starting the deployment, to actually download all of the dependency chain. So what we do is, even if you've selected that option, we download the application dependencies as needed. So that way we can run the evaluation rules, and if the dependency is not needed, then we can skip the download and proceed. The other thing is the applications cannot run directly from the distribution point, so we also, even if you're using that option for the task sequence, we do download the content locally before kicking off the installation.
And as we're looking at content with OSD, the one other thing to kind of call out too, as we're doing the download all before starting the deployments, because you might have multiple deployment types that may or may not be applicable to different OSs. So maybe the example is you have Adobe Reader app, and there's Adobe 9 and Adobe 10. Adobe 9 goes to XP, Adobe 10 goes to Windows 7. we won't know which one we need to evaluate and install. So for the download all when it's needed, we're going to go and download all the content for all the deployment types of the app. So it's going to be potentially a fairly large download depending on what you have going on there. But when we do things like download when needed or with the dependencies, we wait till we evaluate what we need and we only download the content then. So everywhere we can get an efficiency on the content download, we're taking advantage of those types of things. But for the things that we blindly don't know what's going on because we're going to be transitioning an environment, we're going to download everything so we have the content available. Okay, so again, lots of time spent on integration with the application model, integration with the user-centric vision. We're still deploying OSs to machines where we're trying to optimize as much as we can for the end user. We talked a little bit about user-device affinity in the application sessions yesterday. We're going to touch on how we can actually integrate it to an OS deployment. So we've gone and we've added the ability to script in setting user-device affinity as part of the OS deployment. It sets the relationship from when you're starting from bootable media, Pixie, or pre-staged media. If you're using an existing OS, so you're going from like Windows XP to Windows 7, we'll maintain that relationship for you. We just won't allow you to change it. But any new PC builds, we give you that option. As we're setting that option, we know that there might be multiple ways you want to set it. Like you might say, this group of PCs can't set user device affinity. So we'll actually allow you to say, it's not applicable to this task sequence. Likewise, you might say, you know what, I'm going to let users do it, but I still want an administrator to approve it. So we give you that administrator approval mechanism. And then you might just have a fairly relaxed environment. And you say, you know what, I'm going to put maybe some little bit of scripting in and authenticate the user. I trust the user if the authentication goes through, and I can just set up something like an auto approval. So a few controls to make sure that you're not doing too much with the user device affinity and kind of getting it out of control, and allowing you to take advantage of it during your deployments. Okay, kind of touched on this. User's able to define the setting available to boot media, Pixie, or pre-stage media. Also, this is directly assigned to a certificate. So as you're sending things off, like maybe boot media gets lost and it's set to some sort of auto approval, when you revoke the cert for that boot media, obviously that task sequence will be able to process it. So there's a few extra hooks in there too to make sure that we have the tight control on these types of things. During the deployment, what you do is before the setup Windows and Configuration Manager action, all you need to do is set a task sequence variable with the domain ID and user, and then you can do multiple ones separated by a semicolon. So it's just an easy way to script it in. The common thing we always like to say is we recommend using the pre-start command. We've actually worked with the MDT team and the UDI interface, and they're bringing UDA into some of their basic workflows. So you'll be able to actually take advantage of that with the MDT RTW that was announced yesterday. And then the last part is we're actually going to send up a specific status message so that you can do some reporting off this as well. So if you want to see how many machines are getting registered during OS deployment, or if you just want to kind of do any audits, there'll actually be a status message in there to help you kind of look over your environment. Okay, which brings us to our favorite slide that we keep talking about throughout our app sessions and throughout our OSD sessions is what does this all kind of mean for task sequencing? So the general recommendation from the product team is try to leverage applications for most of your complex type of deployments. We know in the past when you weren't doing OSD, a lot of people would be using task sequences for like generic software distribution. So for this, we spend a lot of time in app. We're looking at it and we're saying, hey, as you're doing this, here are some things to note when you're using applications in a task sequence. First of all, just applications aren't user targeted, so there's always going to be a limitation on what you can send out there. They're still machine-based. Also, apps are designed for dependencies and version management and supersedence. So if you're doing any of the complex things with app and you're doing supersedence or some of the inline revisioning, you don't get the full advantage of it in the task sequence. It's just kind of more of a fire and forget and doesn't do that state-based. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind there. We're not going to prevent it, but we're just going to say, hey, as you guys are task sequencing, kind of think about what your need is and look to just basic apps for these types of things. Now, naturally, we know there's a ton of reasons you need to install apps in a task sequence. That's why we've spent some time on it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to install anything that we need state restore on. But with user device affinity, we just also want to call out that you can go in, set pre-deploy on these apps, and when we exit the task sequence, those will automatically install. So hopefully we'll be able to simplify some task sequences, leverage some applications, do some of that user device affinity and just streamline the whole process there.
So I'm just going to touch a little bit on some of the work that we've done on the Pixie Services Point. What you'll notice if you've been playing around with the console this week is the Pixie Service Point role actually no longer exists. What we've done is when we looked in your environments, we found out that a lot of the times you ended up co-hosting a Pixie Service Point with a distribution point in your remote locations. And so what we did, along with a couple of the other OSD-specific roles, was actually combine that in with the distribution point and really just make Pixie Services an optional component on top of distribution points. We get a lot of cool things with that actually going on as well. It used to be the Pixie Services Point would actually connect to the site services database to be able to look up the client. We've changed that around now so that it actually queries the MP, and it really gives you a much higher increase in scale. So we go from being able to support about 75 Pixie service points per site to now up to 5,000 Pixie-enabled distribution points per primary site.
And just to kind of go a little more detail, we know there's a lot of feedback on Pixie Service Point in Configuration Manager 2007. So if you look at the numbers here, I think we hit some really nice scale numbers for you. Again, we're going to allow for up to 5,000 Pixie Service Points with the new architecture attached to a primary site. Just to understand, as you're doing it, we still have a little bit of funny math going on here, where you'll need to, you can't have more than 250 per site. So for an overall primary site with some scaled out secondary sites, you can have an aggregate of 5,000. We just don't support more than 250, and it's a little bit more of a DP limitation, 250 distribution points tied directly to a secondary site or directly to a primary site. And then again, that whole aggregate can be 5,000. So if you're scaling out your network topology with secondary sites, no big deal. If you're directly attaching, which if you get to 5,000, you'll probably want to scale out with the secondary just to get your content offloaded. So there's a little bit of math that you'll still need there, kind of like the old 75 with no more than 10 per site. Just something to kind of call out.
And the real benefit of that, as you mentioned, even with the secondary sites, is that you get the fan out of content, so you're not replicating the same content over and over across common sets of links. So.
Yep. One thing we don't talk about here specifically is multicast still does rely on site count. So if you're using a lot of multicast, the scale numbers will reduce due to some limitations with too many servers with site count. We do know multicast is mostly for those large campus and data center situations, so we haven't seen the requests get up to like 5,000. But we know that customers using branch offices definitely want to get those Pixie scale numbers up.
So the other optimization that we did, for those of you who remember, we used to have distribution point shares on Pixie servers, which we used to actually get the boot image out to the Pixie server. At the end of the day, those ended up, I think, causing more confusion than they were worth because people would end up distributing extra content to those automatically. So what we've done is actually eliminated those and instead moved that option to say whether a boot image can be used for Pixie onto the properties of the boot image itself. Now, under the covers, we still use a lot of the same technology, and so we actually still have 2 copies of that boot image package on the distribution point, but the idea here is that we really try to simplify the administration. Again, as I mentioned before, we still leverage Windows deployment services. One of the cool things I think we did in this release is automatically deploy Windows deployments, or enable the Windows deployment services role to a distribution point if it's not yet enabled. So you don't necessarily have to go and spend all your time getting the prereqs ready to go. We'll just automatically detect and install that if it's not ready. And as with the distribution point, the Pixie services point is supported on both x86 and x64.
And just for multicast, because we didn't include it in the deck here, multicast still needs a 64-bit OS because it's relying on site count. So distribution point with Pixie is all 32-bit for Windows Server 2003 SP2 and later. And then if you do need multicast, obviously that was a Windows Server 2008 feature, but it won't be supported on Windows Server 2008 32-bit for Configuration Manager 2012. Cool. So we'll have all those options for you.
So I'm just going to pop into the UI and show you a quick demo for this. There we go.
Just cancel that.
So I can now I can either enable the Pixie services point when I install a new role, or I can actually go into an existing distribution point that I've got here and enable it. So I'm just going to go into Properties. And you'll notice on the Pixie tab, I now have a checkbox to enable Pixie support for clients. I have to agree that we're going to open the firewall ports for this. And also note, as I said, that Windows deployment services will automatically be enabled on that role if it isn't already. Now, the rest of this information here is exactly as you've used before when you were setting up a Pixie services point. So I'm going to type a password and click OK. So automatically then at that point, we're going to automatically go and set up Windows deployment services and enable Pixie on that role.
One thing to note, if anyone's downloaded and used 2012 product currently, you'll notice when you set up a distribution point, we actually give you a checkbox to opt into IIS, or Internet Information Services. For Windows deployment services, it's just going to happen. We know that Pixie absolutely needs it, so there's no opt-in. It's just going to get installed. Now, if you go ahead and you pre-install it, we'll recognize the installations there and not disrupt it, so maybe you're co-locating WDS with some other Pixie stuff. We won't go and tamper with that installation too much. Just put our provider in there. We'll install it only if it's not there, but you don't opt into it. We know that it needs to be there, so we're just going to go and install it.
We'll note down here on the preview pane that you can actually see that we do actually list on this particular role that we've got the operating system Pixie point enabled. And in this particular case, we don't have multicast enabled, but it can be enabled in exactly the same place I was before. Now I'm going to jump back to the software library and go take a look at my boot image just so I can show you what I was talking about when I said you could actually, from the boot image itself, enable it for Pixie. I'm going to go to the Data Source tab, and you'll notice down here we have a new option that says Deploy this boot image from the Pixie service point. If I enable that and deploy this boot image to the distribution point that has a Pixie services point, we're automatically going to make this boot image available for Pixie at that point.
And the really cool thing about that, I think we covered in one of the infrastructure sessions, with the changes we've done to the distribution point and content management, we're not going to send it twice over the network. As you enable and disable that checkbox, we're going to use the WMI provider on the distribution point, send a message down there, and then copy it over. When you remove it, we'll delete the file from there. So we're doing everything on the local DP through the WMI provider. So we're making it really network friendly. We're not, even though we're using 2 spots on the distribution point, we're reducing all that extra traffic that's going to the distribution point. There we go. Okay, so another big change that we've taken in Configuration Manager 2012, and if you looked at the early betas, this didn't even come until pretty late in the cycle, is a change to the import and export process. Spent a lot of time over 4 years working with customers. As we were developing app model, we were using software distribution through task sequences for a lot of our things, and I was constantly looking at these XMLs and then trying to figure out what the XML referenced and how the test sequence works and what metadata was being referenced there. And we're like, this isn't really effective for sharing between communities or going between test to production. So we've gone and we made it a more robust process. So we now have the ability to go and export a task sequence with dependencies. So we give you a few options. The first option is we're going to go and allow you to export it like we do today. Just a really flat reference. It'll contain the metadata of the task sequence with pointers to the objects that are there. The cool thing is when we go and import, and it's just those pointers, if those objects already exist, we're going to link them up for you. If they don't exist, they'll still be bad references like you would see in Configuration Manager 2007 today. So similar parity to 2007, we have that today. We also have another option there that's export with all the related references. So not only can I take the metadata of the task sequence, I can take all the packages, drivers, driver packages, boot image, OS image, applications, and take that as a collective set. So it makes it really easy when I build the test sequence, test it, validate it, know it's all working, to go between my test to my production environment. Or maybe I want to just keep a backup if I'm going to do some major changes to it, and then I can pull that back in and revert it or create a new copy of it. And then the last one is we allow you to go export it with all those related references, and then pull the content into a common folder. So maybe you just want to go and put it, take it between 2 environments. You can go and export all the content, it'll copy it all into a folder, and then when we import, we'll go and we'll update all that source path information and create the new content snapshot where the content will copy into the content library. So 3 different experiences for that export to kind of give you different options depending on what you need to do there. Then when we go and import it, we're going to give you some conflict resolution. We know that you might have multiple references across multiple task sequences, so we're going to go and we're going to handle those. We have a few different options for the way we handle it. If it's an existing object, obviously we'll let you go link to that. If the object hasn't existed, we'll go and allow you to create a new object. And then for things like applications that actually have built-in revision management, we can go and add revisions if we detect that it's not the exact same version of the app that was previously imported. So maybe you've updated the app, or maybe you're accidentally going back to an old app. You can either ignore it, or you can add a revision, and maybe you want to go back to the older version for some reason. So a few different ways to do the import, and kind of help you guys out there as well. This will work between different hierarchies, so test or lab to production. It's great for the merger acquisition scenario. I know throughout the week we've talked about we don't have a full site attached, detached that was kind of talked about in one of the hierarchy sessions. We've gone through all the import-export processes to make it easy to move data between two hierarchies. So if you have any of those kind of merger acquisitions, you can do that. And then community sharing. I spent a lot of time with our, I think it was 30-plus TAP customers, looking through OS deployment as we were going through the stages. So it was a great way, like maybe we were troubleshooting an app deployment, or they're having Windows 7 failed deployments. They were able to just send me their task sequence with all the related objects. That plus the logs, we could easily detect and identify what was going on. So it was a real easy way to kind of troubleshoot some of those scenarios there. Again, exports can be imported to the same hierarchy, so it's a nice little disaster recovery type of thing there. And then just to note, the XML format's no longer available, so we've moved up to this new consistent format. So if you do have a 2007 site, we support the migration framework to get all those task sequences over, and then once you import and export out the Configuration Manager 2012 site, the import and export will work for just that site. Okay. With that said, I'm going to kind of walk you through a demo of it, let you see how it all works. So you can see here I have my 2012 console. I go over to my task sequences node. And what I've done is I've set up a Windows 7 SP1 image that I deployed to my corporation. If I look down here, I have several references. I have two applications, my CCM framework tools and Microsoft Math, my boot image, my OS image, the client agent package, and USMT for my deployment. So I'll just take a quick edit here. You guys can just see the standard workflow of it. So typical task sequence from our out-of-the-box wizard that I know everyone doesn't ever modify because it's pretty basic. Anyways. So I go up here. I can click export. Again, the couple different options. If I deselect the first option, which also deselects the second one, this gives you that same experience as Configuration Manager 2007. So, oops, sorry, my zoom-in skills suck. The export all task sequences, all task sequence dependencies, if you uncheck that, again, that's just that basic 2007 experience. So, demo done. We're using, just so you guys know, we're using a zip file. If you've played with our application export, or if you looked at the new package export, it's a zip file. It's actually built off the Open Office format. I think that's exactly what it is, something like that. But it's built off basically open standards for the way we build the relationships in the document. If you're kind of geeky like me, you might crack open the zip and look at all the different XMLs and see how the references are. But it's just it's a common open source documented format. So for here, I'm going to actually go and export all my dependencies, but I'm not going to take the content because that'll take a little bit long. It'll go and it'll validate the task sequence to determine everything that I would need to export. Also for things like applications, if the application had a dependency, it'll find that dependency and include it in there. So we'll take everything that's directly referenced plus application dependencies. So we can see here I have my full list of items that are there. Hit next, finish off the wizard.
So John, this is using the same framework that we're using for migration, correct?
It's built off the similar framework. It's a little bit slightly different because the migration framework does a direct database attachment, takes secrets. This won't take anything like passwords or anything that would be considered private or secret data. So just like the XML wouldn't copy your domain join password, this won't do that as well, but our migration framework will do that as well. But yeah, a lot of commonality between this and our migration. And in fact, we started doing some of the initial work with app and this, and that's what kickstarted our migration framework. Okay. And then, like I said, if you just browsed here, it's just a normal XML relationship, so you can go in. just kind of see how it all does the references there. So something kind of cool, like I said, if you're a little geeky like me and you want to see how it all works, it's kind of fun to walk. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to actually walk through an import. I had previously exported a different task sequence, so I'm going to go over here and show you that. I don't believe I have any drivers, or I just have a few Hyper-V drivers and maybe no driver package. Yep. And then we can look in the applications node, and I just have the framework and the mass app, and then my typical two packages there. So go over here, import task sequence. My lab files, oops. Don't hit enter. All right, it's going to go and it's going to scan in everything that's in there. Take a second, because this one's a little bit beefier of a task sequence, some drivers, I think an extra app. So enough so you can see some of the import resolution changes. Okay, so if we go in here, you can see most of the things are duplicates, so I already have those imported. There's also a series of things like create new. So there's a mix of things like my device drivers. Most of those are new. I do have one new application here and two existing applications, so we can actually see those get linked up. And then obviously it's a slightly different task sequence, so it'll create a new instance of that. And then in some of these, I think this one here is my app. Okay. If this app actually was different at all, I'd have the option of ignore duplicate or add revision, since it's the exact same version, and we can detect that based on the GUIDs in the app. The only option is ignore duplicate because it's the exact same version. Okay, so the import process will take a moment here to go and create all those brand new objects for me. Can you tell a joke while we're waiting? No.
Da, da, da,
I know.
da, da.
Sorry about this. I thought it was a little bit faster for a demo purpose. I got a little too excited putting a lot of drivers in there. While that's going in, though, you can actually see in the background it's been creating. Oh, it's all done. Perfect. We can see Microsoft App V Client was my new application, so that automatically got added. We can see in here my driver list is a lot fuller, so I have more drivers added. Additionally, my driver package came over, so I have a driver package that contains those Hyper-V drivers. And then lastly, if we just go here, we can see there's the brand new task sequence. Has all the references here. And the coolest part is when I edit it, I don't get an error that I need to go fix a whole bunch of stuff up. Everything's in here and ready to go. Let's go to something section. So my Windows 7 image, my driver package. So really cool. Hopefully that'll make your guys' lives a lot easier as you're working with Configuration Manager OSD. Okay, some other things we spent some time on were finding ways to align OSD with the rest of the product. If you've seen the new admin console, spent a lot of time with 2012, you see that we've tried to rework the console, make it easier to use. OSD was kind of jammed into its own little private node for the most part in Configuration Manager 2007. We've gone and done a bunch of alignments with deployments. So you can see a screenshot of some good deployments here. You see a mix of both applications, task sequence, programs. I go to one place to monitor all my deployments. Now, naturally, if you have a lot of deployments, the list could get large, but you could leverage something like RBA and be limited to the deployments that you have. So if someone just does task sequencing, they'll just see the task sequence deployments. So it's 100% integrated with all our current stuff. And then task sequences are also integrated with Software Center for a common experience. we'll go ahead and we'll show you it's an operating system deployment task sequence when it's there. We'll also do some detection in Software Center to give different warnings when a task sequence is going to be deployed. So if you are doing things like associating a boot image or having an apply OS action, we're going to know that that task sequence is intended to be more destructive versus if you're just doing maybe a basic script-based thing like install an app and restart a service. So we'll give you a different warning that'll be a little bit more, it'll have like a little bit red exclamation point to tell the end user that, hey, by the way, I'm going to go do OSD to this versus, oh, I'm just going to go do this maintenance task type thing. So if you're still using a little bit of that generic task sequencing, we'll kind of help out there as well. And then like I talked about before, we're still machine targeted for task sequences, so it'll only be in Software Center. It won't be in the catalog quite yet. Okay. Centralized management is another area of change. Again, hierarchy-wide media, task sequences are global data and can be used anywhere. So we've improved the overall experiences for the centralized administration. Generally, we recommend doing everything at the CAS. By default, we'll go and create boot images at the CAS and nowhere else. You can still go and create and import boot images out anywhere. So we'll be able to do that. All the objects are global data and can be edited from anywhere. So if you're creating a task sequence at the CAS, you can access objects that might have been created at the primary, or you can go and re-edit those objects at the primary. So the flexibility to do everything like you can with all the other objects in the hierarchy. They can be deployed from anywhere. Again, we always recommend doing deployments from the CAS. So if you need to log onto a primary site for some reason, they could be deployed there, even if they were created at primary 1 versus primary 2. So all that management's built in. The one thing, and I didn't put this on the slide, I apologize. Boot images are the only thing that can't be managed globally due to the construct of how when we update a DP and we edit the boot image, inject drivers and all that. That's currently limited in the site. We're looking long-term to try to find a way to fix that. But for this release, that's the only object that won't be centrally managed.
And of course, remember that you can use the RBAC feature for all of these as well, so that you can make sure that you can set scopes so that you also have the ability to limit what task sequences get targeted. So you can be sure that you're not going to accidentally target an operating system at all systems. Yep.
And then for computer import, you can go and import computers at any object, but when you go and you create that association, the association is limited to the 2 computers at the same site. So for example, if the source computer is at primary site 1, even if you've imported that computer account at the CAS, it'll create a relationship with primary site 1 and directly move that object there. So when you go and build that PC, it'll go get attached to primary 1. So just remember when you're doing side-by-side migrations with that association, for some security reasons, we've actually tied it to the site still. That'll be one of the things that can still be globally edited, but still has some site-based ties to it. And then, of course, we talked about Pixie and distribution point roles. None of the roles will be able to be edited at the CAS or created at the CAS. Sorry, let me rephrase that. None of the roles can be directly attached to the CAS. They can be created or managed from the CAS. So the servers never directly report there, but you can do all your administration there. So lots of alignments for the centralized management. You can pretty much do everything there. If you do everything at the CAS, life is just super easy. You don't have to worry about the one gotcha of the boot media. But other than that, pretty straightforward. And that's it. And I finished early. Dang. So here's some related sessions. Lots of stuff going on this week with Configuration Manager 2012. We have like 12 sessions, 14, something like that all up. Most of them flowing through the end of the week. Lots of instructor-led labs, lots of hands-on labs. So if you had a chance to, we got a couple of OSD labs. I'm actually doing one at 8:30 on Friday.
We hope to see you all there 8:30 on Friday morning in the instructor-led labs.
More information. We've been spending a lot of time getting this information out on some blogs. So there's the OSD team actually has a specific blog that actually I think Brett was one of the guys that created for 2007. We keep passing that information. Not only does it talk about how to use the features, we're looking at publishing some continuous content that's kind of more troubleshooting that doesn't meet our core docs type of stuff. Like one of the things is, even though Pixie has been simplified and changed, there's still, the normal troubleshooting gotchas because it's config-man plus WDS and a couple of systems. So we're looking to do something like maybe a Pixie blog and get that out there. We also have our basic Configuration Manager team blog. That's just pretty much the aggregate for the entire team. System Center team blog, System Center and TechNet Edge. We actually posted a whole bunch of how-to videos. Not sure if you guys are in the State of the Union. Bill was talking about a bunch of videos where we walk through a lot of these features, like the demos we did today, and then normal Twitter stuff. So as always, complete your session evaluations, enter to win prizes. I always hear there's cool prizes. And with that, I actually have a bunch of time for Q&A.